In the spring of 1957, Mrs. Eddy and I found it necessary to make a trip to Virginia. Since we were driving a car on the return trip, the situation presented an opportunity to travel by train. We decided to go by way of Cincinnati and ride one of the crack trains of the Norfolk and Western, possibly behind steam. Because we would return to Flint, we left our car there and used the bus to get to Detroit. There we took the afternoon Baltimore and Ohio flyer to Cincinnati, where we made very convenient connections for boarding our sleeper on the overnight Pocahontas to Norfolk. The next morning we were pleased to find that only at the rear of the train, but also a New York Central car with half doors. So as you see, we spent a good share of the time on the rear vestibule. Although the day was somewhat misty and not very good for pictures, we thoroughly enjoyed the passing scenery. Earlier, we had intimate views of the towns in the Pocahontas coal region, as sharp curves and narrow valleys brought the track right up to the front door of homes in some places. Later, there was more elbow room, and the spring blossoms were much more in evidence. Easier curves gave us frequent and better opportunities to watch our J-class steam engine at work. The rear-end brakeman was very tolerant of our desire to occupy the vestibule. He seemed to share our interest in the passing scenery and kept us informed on landmarks along the right-of-way. He also seemed very much aware of the rail fan's viewpoint. As we left Roanoke about noon, the brakeman suggested that we keep on the lookout because on some trips our train would be routed over on the left-hand track to pass an eastbound coal drag on the Blue Ridge grade. By this time the sun had put in an appearance and we were elated over the prospect for pictures. A few miles out of Roanoke, we were delighted to find that we were traveling on the westbound track, so Helen and I saw to it that our cameras were in order and ready for action. Our brakeman was keeping watch and finally warned us to be ready, and soon we could hear the roar of exhaust as we overtook a struggling Y6 pusher. Although the Blue Ridge grade is not steep by Western standards, the Norfolk and Western gives its locomotives plenty to do, and the results are spectacular, as is apparent. Although we were too busy to count the seemingly endless string of loaded coal hoppers, we learned later that this was a set-off train of 100 cars destined for the siding at Montvale just over the hill. As we passed the head end, we found another big Y6 obviously carrying its share of the load, and we became so absorbed in the beautiful scene that I almost forgot to shut off the movie camera. Thus we experienced one of the really thrilling episodes of our many years of interest in railroads and railroading. The sight and sound of those giant steam engines bending every effort to get that 6,000 tons of coal over the mountain had a lasting effect on us. Add to that the sight of other trains on the sidings along the way, the friendly salute of members of each train crew as we passed, the picturesque setting in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where and why we conceived the idea for making this film. So a Norfolk and Western Y6 pusher completes another job of boosting coal tonnage through Buford Gap and the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. The rear end brakeman had pulled the pin as we came through the gap, so the engine could uncouple its speed, and we lose momentum as the caboose disappears around the bend. Later we move over to the passing siding, and the engineer drops off to check by phone with Roanoke on clearance for return to the pusher siding at the base of the mountains. The daily routine of a pusher engine generally consists of short periods of intense activity and long intervals of idleness. In fair weather, the engine crew whiles away the hours in a sort of outdoor lounge they have concocted. However, when it is wet or cold, they have to make the best of the engine cab or the cramped telephone shanty. The latter has a stove and seating capacity for two, quite unsuited for visitors. We made our first appearance at the Boaz pusher sighting at 8 one morning, and it was 2 in the afternoon before the first work showed up. Of course, it often happens that a returning pusher will find another job sitting there when he backs down to the siding. Although it is old stuff to the crew, the rail fan can ease the idle time watching the downbound freights or the occasional passenger train. Although the Boaz pusher siding is some distance from the highway and not too easy to locate, the ardent rail fans seem to have no difficulty in finding the place. A cultivated field south of the tracks gave the photographer plenty of working space, and the engine crews are always very kind about obtaining information regarding train movements. While our pusher dozes peacefully on the siding, and since our story revolves around both the Blue Ridge pusher and the double-headed coal trains eastbound out of Roanoke, we will return to town and see how the train we are interested in is organized. Incoming coal trains from the west are sorted into new consists for distribution from Roanoke. Hoppers of 50 and 70-ton capacity are usually mixed so that tonnage is figured from about average of the two. The general practice in handling loaded hoppers eastward was about as follows. A train of approximately 100 cars is made up and sent over the Blue Ridge to Montvale with either a Y6 or an A as road engine. Of course, pusher assistance is used up the hill. At Montvale, the hoppers are set off on the siding for future use, and the road engine returns light to Roanoke. This is the set-off train we overtook and passed when traveling on the Pocahontas. Back at the yards, 2 more coal trains have been made up to dispatch to Norfolk. Each of these trains has approximately 140 cars and is double-headed usually by a Y6 lead engine and an A-class road engine. After an assist over the mountain by our Y6 pusher, these trains stop at the Montvale siding and switch half of the set-off string into their load. Thus, they leave Montvale with about 190 cars, which involves around 11,000 tons of payload. Eastward at Lynchburg, I believe, the Y6 lead engine would drop off and the A would take the load the remaining 200 miles into Norfolk alone. Of course, the procedure outlined above would then be repeated, and it was the fortunate train watcher on the Blue Ridge grade who was able to view the complete show in the daylight hours. The crews of the doubleheader we will follow across the Blue Ridge were called for 6 a.m. To play safe, we arrived at the roundhouse at 5:30. As is usual with freight movements, and fortunately for the photographer, there was considerable delay in the various preparations, and our train did not depart until after 8. Thus, we were able to obtain these early morning scenes in the yards at Schaefer's Crossing. As our engines are backed off the ready track and down through the yards to pick up our string of 140 hopper cars, perhaps we should present some data on the locomotives of our doubleheader. Our lead engine is a Y6 number 2176, and the road engine is an A number 1230. Both Class A and Y6 were articulated in common with most other 4-cylinder steam engines. That is, the front set of cylinders and drivers is pivoted so as to swing on curves. This effect may be seen at several points in the film at crossovers and switches. The Class A engines had larger drivers, a 2664 wheel setup, and were largely used on fast freight service. At a distance, the Y6 had a profile very similar to that of the A. In fact, I believe the boiler was essentially the same. However, the Y6 had a 2882 wheel arrangement and was one of the few true Mallet compounds in successful use on U.S. railroads. It was a comparatively slow-speed giant with tremendous pulling ability under all operating conditions. The versatility of the Y6 was due mainly to the fact that it could be operated in simple as well as in compound. In addition, when working in compound, which was generally used at road speed, a booster effect was obtained by admitting high-pressure steam directly into the low-pressure cylinders of the front engine. This gave added power at the lower speeds and had a startling effect on the exhaust, as the individual beats were lost in an almost continuous roar. Generally speaking, the Y6 tackled a load in simple, using high-pressure steam in all 4 cylinders. As the load was brought up to about 10 miles an hour, the engineer would shift to compound, wherein the rear high-pressure cylinder exhaust was directed to the front cylinders to be reused. However, in case the load forced a drop in speed back to 10 miles an hour or so, the booster would be cut in. We might safely say that the Y6 was actually a 3-speed steam engine. pusher siding is at the foot of the Blue Ridge grade, so the trains picking up a pusher cut off their power and use the lower end of the grade to ease to a stop. I gather that in this manner they use little or no air and thus cut the time for pumping up the train line to a minimum. The caboose of our doubleheader slides by slowly and seems never to stop. Reference points are used by the head-end engineer to spot the caboose above the siding, but once in a while a stop is made with the rear afoul of the siding switch. Then there is a prolonged exchange of phone calls and whistle signals on the subject. One day when we were on hand, the engineer of a time freight left his caboose right on the Boaz siding switch. He had just enough load that his A-class engine with his larger drivers had a tough time pulling into the clear. The pusher engineer has signaled that he is coupled up and ready to go, and the lead engine has answered. But it sometimes takes quite a while to get the train line pumped up and everything synchronized to go. When the pusher is coupled, the engineer opens the throttle and applies full force to the rear of the train. If the brakes are set, nothing happens. But otherwise, the pusher takes up all the slack it can and then sits to await action from up ahead. Telephone communication between the front and rear end, it often happens that a stop is made with a phone inconveniently located for one end or the other, and whistle signals are necessary. However, regardless of the telephone, the use of the whistle seems to be a standard part of this operation, and several exchanges of the whistle signal are often in order. To the outsider, all of this delay seems highly unnecessary, but it doesn't seem to bother the train crews, and is probably part of the tradition of railroading. Thank you.